Life can sometimes be very simple. I state this every single time I review a game that involves a mech. But it also applies on other things, like Orcs Must Die, a premise that is very straightforward, and the franchise has been sticking to this premise for a long time now, and with a debatable exception, a lot of success. For me, Orcs Must Die has been a go-to co-op game whenever I want to just sit back with a friend, play a game but not think too much about it and all. But seeing orcs explode in a cartoon style also didn't hurt, as it is just a lot of fun. But is it still a lot of fun? Does the simple premise of orcs that must die still work after all this time? Well, let's just find out. This is Orcs Must Die 3. Orcs Must Die 3 continues the story of its predecessors. Or well, story, it's a bit hard to call it a story. Or to call the stories in the previous installments actual stories. Cause Orcs Must Die never really bothered by giving us large, deep, lore-rich stories with interesting characters or events. It usually boils down to some fun, cool, gimmicky cutscenes that sets the stage, and in later installment just add loose references here and there from the previous games. What comes the closest here to a story is that in Orcs Must Die 3 we follow the next gen of war mages fighting against a new invasion of orcs that is created by a very shallow vendetta between two old friends. And normally I would feel a degree of disappointment as a story opportunity is wasted here, and in this case even very simply and easily tossed to the side. But for Orcs Must Die I do not feel that. In fact I don't care, cause the formula of Orcs Must Die is, well, Orcs Must Die. It's the one and only premise the series follows from the very beginning, and I would even argue that adding a lot of story and such could do more harm than good. Orcs Must Die 3, but also previous installments, are not designed to carry a story other than a quick setup. A premise to build the entire setting of killing endless waves of orcs on. Its very cartoony, colorful and over-the-top presentation backs this up very well. Its main characters, enemies and world is very stereotypical fantasy, and your attention should not go to that for one single second. Instead, it should go to the spectacle of killing waves upon waves of orcs and other creatures, cause that is what this game is solely about. Orcs Must Die 3 is a tower defense game where you need to protect a rift from waves of orcs. To defend your rift, you place loads of traps along the route these orcs walk towards your rift. And that is where Orcs Must Die 3 becomes very creative and iconic. Many of these traps are ridiculously over the top, like large spikes jumping from the ground, impaling the orcs, or even larger factory-style presses coming from the ceiling crushing them. Walls that shoot arrows endlessly, large automatic ballistas and even lasers. And of course, the classic launch trap. There is a large variety of traps to use to protect your rift, and a lot of combinations to make your defense very strong. Cause while these traps are very powerful, there is a degree of tactic required to beat the levels. Each map offers different situations how defenses can be placed. Sometimes only giving you access to certain types of traps as well, meaning that winning combinations of traps cannot always be formed in each situation. It's not a huge moment to adapt to, but more something to keep in mind whenever you switch stages, or when you upgrade your traps. The latter one being something I really liked, as it was a clever way to not just add a little bit of depth to the traps themselves, but also made exploring new traps just a lot more exciting. Of course, some upgrades are more useful than others, but it did make me investigate and pick traps I otherwise would not consider using from the start. Now, so far the gameplay premise might sound very similar and even copy-paste from its previous installments. And to be honest, it mostly is. Orcs Must Die 3 stays very close and plays it very safe when it comes to implementing new things or changing older aspects. It improves some of them here and there. Again, look at the upgrades of the traps, but it mostly is the same. Keyword mostly, as there are a couple of new aspects introduced in the game. The biggest one being war scenarios. Throughout the entire series, maps are usually kept very small, and the game wants you to be clever in using small spaces as effectively as possible with the traps available. With war scenarios, this perspective is more or less flipped. Instead of small spaces, you fight on large open battlefields and get access to special skilled up versions of your traps to fight the biggest hordes of enemies ever spawned in the series. And the first time fighting on these maps is exciting. Large amount of enemies, lots of interesting traps, fun and good map design, and all of it just seems to fit and work perfectly. But these scenarios lay bare an unexpected problem as well. In Orcs Must Die 3, there's a lot more focus on player action than the tower defense / traps aspect. In general, traps just felt a lot weaker than in previous games, making you do more of the heavy lifting yourself. And originally I was fine with this change, but now after I completed the game I am a bit on the fence about it. Mainly because the action lacks a degree of impact that the traps themselves do have. There is little to no satisfaction in killing the enemy yourself, and ultimately it's also just less fun. I mean, I'd rather see an orc be thrown off a bridge via a launch trap into lava than just kill it by a gunshot. For some, this might do the trick, but I like to beat my enemies with a well-placed trap layout. Something I could rarely form as enemies kept destroying it every other moment, forcing me to get into the action one way or another. In these war scenarios, this problem was somewhat avoided as there are a handful of traps that combine both aspects at the same time. Those carry the impact and are fun to use, especially in combination with co-op. However, you don't get to use those traps very often or enjoy them for a long period of time, as those traps are only limited to the war scenario maps. And despite the size of the war scenario maps, these are very short experiences, underutilizing heavily the newest and biggest aspect to this game. Especially considering that these maps are also absent from the endless mode, meaning the chance of spending a lot of time in these is kept short on purpose. But the war scenarios are not the only thing that are short. The game itself is also just very short. Levels take roughly 20 to 30 minutes to complete, and in less than 10 hours you are through 2 campaigns and an endless mode that took 25 rounds. Now yes, the game does have replayability via difficulty, high scores and etc. But especially with the daily challenge and scramble, they tried to make things more interesting. Daily challenges is what you expect. A map is picked and some altering rules are applied to it, making it more interesting and again, replayable. Scramble is in my opinion an upgraded version of the daily challenges. You get 5 rounds on 5 different maps, and after you completed each map you get a buff and debuff, making you, your traps or the enemies stronger. A fairly interesting mode, but for me and probably most, it's not a lot to keep playing this game. I mean, I didn't put in hundreds of hours in the previous games either, perfecting each map and beating it on the highest difficulty. That is for a niche group of Orcs Must Die players. For me it's usually one serious playthrough and then booting it up once a while to have some fun with friends. Because for that, Orcs Must Die in general is just great. It's a perfect co-op game to just jump in, have fun and jump back out, only to return later in the future. You don't have to take it super seriously to beat it, but it can be challenging for a moment. And that is honestly what I really like about Orcs Must Die 3. It's a game that knows what made the other installments fun and popular, but still wanted to improve, which it did, but did not lose itself in bringing too much to the table. The focus switch of tower defense to more action focus is a debatable thing, but it does not overcloud the other aspects in a complete negative way. How I see it is that this is just another slightly different implementation of the series formula. And yes, that does mean it's a lot of the same, but enough to change it to make it different. If you played the previous installments and liked them, then you will like Orcs Must Die 3 for sure. Be that in the way like me via co-op, or perfecting every level in the highest difficulty, or any way in between. In the end, it just captures the fun of the series that you would expect. It's silly, cartoonish, over the top, and again, just a lot of fun. There are only a few things to keep in mind when you jump in. Mainly that the focus of gameplay is shifted more towards you, the player, than the tower defense aspect, and that once you completed the game there is not a lot more to stick around for. But you will return. I know I will. I did the same thing with Orcs Must Die 2, and I will for Orcs Must Die 3 as well.